They move through relationships like nothing touches them. In, out, and gone. No regret. No attachment. But there's always one person they never fully leave behind. The one they still check on. Still think about years later. By the end of this video, you will understand the precise psychological profile of the person an avoidant cannot stop thinking about, and why that profile, once you see it clearly, says far more about your own development than it does about theirs. If this kind of insight is what keeps you coming back, subscribe. Here's the misread most people make when they try to understand avoidant obsession. They think it's about love, that the avoidant keeps thinking about someone because that person was uniquely lovable, more attractive, more interesting, more compatible than the others. That framing is incomplete. It misses the actual psychological driver. Avoidant attachment is not organized around love as its primary currency. It is organized around psychological safety and psychological threat. Every person who enters an avoidance world gets processed through one fundamental question. Does this person make me feel controlled, or does this person make me feel free? Most people, the ones who are easy to manage, easy to secure, easy to hold at the preferred distance, get processed quickly. They are categorized, calibrated, and either kept at the designated range or exited without much internal disruption. But one type of person cannot be processed, not because they are difficult or demanding, not because they create drama or emotional chaos, because they are genuinely, authentically, completely themselves. And in being fully themselves, grounded in their own identity, unbothered by the avoidance distance management, not organized around the avoidance approval, they produce something the avoidance system has no prepared response for: uncertainty about their own desirability. This is the mechanism. The avoidant is not obsessed with who they love the most. They are obsessed with the person they could not secure, not because that person was unavailable as a tactic, because that person was genuinely sovereign. And sovereignty, in someone the avoidant actually wanted, is the one condition that the avoidance system cannot file away and move past. There are 4 phases that describe how this obsession forms and why it persists. The first is the initial disruption phase. In the early stages of contact with this type of person, the avoidant notices something unfamiliar. Most people they encounter orient toward the avoidant, reading them, adjusting to them, shaping their behavior around the avoidance signals. The sovereign person does not. Externally, the dynamic looks like any other in its early stages. There is contact, there is warmth, possibly attraction, possibly a developing connection. Internally, the avoidance calibration system is running and not finding what it usually finds. It is looking for the subtle signs of orientation, the small behavioral tells that indicate the other person is managing themselves around the avoidance reactions. And it isn't finding them consistently. The sovereign person is not performing independence. They simply have it. Their life is full. Their sense of self is not organized around whether the avoidant is warm or cool on any given day. They engage when they want to engage. They are fully present in those moments, and then they are gone, not into waiting, but into their own life. That combination, genuine warmth paired with genuine self-possession, is deeply activating to the avoidance nervous system, not as threat, as something rarer and more disorienting, someone they cannot fully read or predict. The second phase is the pursuit inversion. The avoidance standard operating mode is to receive pursuit while managing distance. Most connections follow this pattern: the other person reaching, the avoidant calibrating how much to allow in, the dynamic running on the fuel of the other person's consistent orientation. With the sovereign person, this pattern either does not form or forms briefly and then inverts. Externally, the avoidant may notice they are initiating more than usual, thinking about the person between contacts in a way that doesn't happen with their typical dynamics, experiencing a low-level preoccupation that runs underneath their daily functioning. Internally, something profoundly uncomfortable is happening. The avoidance system, which is organized around maintaining the upper hand in terms of emotional investment, around needing the connection less than the other person does, is losing that organization. The usual calculus has reversed. The avoidant is the one who cares more, or at least cares in a way they cannot easily manage. And that inversion is, for the avoidant nervous system, both deeply attractive and deeply threatening. The emotional dynamic has shifted from management to genuine vulnerability, and genuine vulnerability for the avoidant is the most destabilizing experience available. The third phase is the protective exit. This is the phase that looks from the outside like the avoidant simply losing interest or pulling back in the usual way. It is not. The protective exit is different from the avoidant's typical distance management. The typical withdrawal is a maintenance behavior, recalibrating to the preferred range when closeness gets uncomfortable. The protective exit with the sovereign person is an emergency behavior. The avoidant has detected genuine risk, not the risk of being smothered or consumed, the risk of being genuinely known, genuinely affected, genuinely dependent on someone's regard. Externally, they disappear, or cool dramatically, or create distance through behavior rather than direct statement. Internally, the exit does not produce the usual relief. That is the critical difference. Normally, withdrawal restores equilibrium. This time, the withdrawal produces a new discomfort, the awareness that the distance they created is costing them something they actually wanted. The sovereign person, who does not chase the avoidant into their retreat, does not provide the behavioral data that would allow the avoidance system to recalibrate. There is no pursuit to manage, no emotional flooding to use as evidence that pulling back was necessary. There is just the sovereign person continuing to be exactly who they are, from a distance, without disruption. And that unbothered continuation is the thing the avoidance mind cannot stop returning to. The fourth phase is the residual obsession. This is the long phase, the phase that can last years. The phase the video's title refers to. Externally, the avoidant has moved on. Other connections, other dynamics. The surface of their life looks forward-facing. Internally, the sovereign person occupies a specific and persistent position in the avoidance psychological landscape. Not as grief necessarily, as an unresolved question. What was that? Why couldn't I manage it? Why does it still register when nothing else does at that level? The obsession is not romantic longing in the conventional sense. It is the avoidance system continuing to process an input that never fully resolved. The sovereign person was never destabilized by the avoidance distance, never confirmed the avoidance implicit belief that genuine connection requires giving up freedom, never played the role of the person who needed more than the avoidant could give. And because none of those confirmations arrived, the mental file on the sovereign person never fully closes. It stays active, a question without an answer, a dynamic without a resolution, an encounter that the avoidance system cannot categorize because the person at its center refused to be defined by the avoidance behavior. Most people, when they realize they might be this person, when they recognize their own profile in what's been described, feel the pull to use this knowledge as a strategy, to perform sovereignty, to deliberately withhold, to manufacture the quality of groundedness in order to produce the obsession it generates. That approach fails immediately, and it fails in a way that is psychologically visible. The avoidance nervous system, which is extraordinarily calibrated to authenticity, can detect performed independence in the same way it can detect performed availability. Manufactured groundedness has a specific texture. It has too many tells. The carefully constructed unavailability, the strategic delay, the absence that is clearly oriented toward the person it's supposedly indifferent to. Genuine sovereignty does not perform. It exists. And the difference between the two is not subtle. It is the difference between someone who is actually living a full life and someone who is managing the appearance of one while waiting to see if the management produces the desired effect. Contrast that with what actually works. You stop trying to produce an effect in the avoidant entirely, not because you've given up on connection, but because you've genuinely reoriented toward your own life, your work, your growth, your relationships, your development, not as a backdrop to the avoidant dynamic, but as the actual content of your existence. And from that place, that genuine, unperformed fullness, you become exactly the person the avoidant cannot process, cannot file away, and cannot stop thinking about. Not as a tactic, as a fact about who you are. There are 5 psychological principles that describe how to inhabit this position authentically rather than strategically. The first is called identity primacy. This is the practice of treating your own sense of self as the primary organizing structure of your life, above your relationship status, above whether the avoidant is engaging or withdrawing, above the outcome of any particular dynamic. Identity primacy means your internal reference point is consistently yourself, your values, your direction, your standards for your own behavior, not as something you remind yourself of in difficult moments, but as the baseline orientation from which you move through every day. The second principle is investment authenticity. Genuine sovereignty is only visible through what you're actually investing in, not what you say you're investing in, not what you post about. What actually has your energy, your time, and your attention. Investment authenticity means the fullness of your life is real, built through real choices, sustained through real effort, producing real satisfaction that exists independent of any relationship dynamic. The avoidant reads your investment level with precision. Real investment cannot be faked. The third is called response proportionality. Sovereign people do not under-respond or over-respond. They respond proportionally to what is actually happening, not to what they're hoping will happen, not to the worst-case interpretation of ambiguous behavior, but to the concrete reality in front of them. Response proportionality means your emotional reactions are scaled to actual events. This is not suppression. It is the natural output of someone whose internal stability is not dependent on the avoidance behavior. The fourth principle is called non-negotiable direction. The sovereign person has somewhere they're going, not vaguely, specifically, a direction that is real and active and not contingent on whether a relationship resolves in a particular way. Non-negotiable direction means that no dynamic, however activating, however unresolved, has the authority to stop your forward movement. The avoidant is obsessed not with someone who is waiting, but with someone who is moving. And movement, genuine and self-directed, is the quality they cannot follow or manage. The fifth is called selective vulnerability. Sovereignty is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the selective expression of it, offered only in contexts that have demonstrated they can hold it with care. Selective vulnerability means you are fully capable of depth, of genuine emotional openness, of real intimacy. You are simply no longer dispersing those qualities indiscriminately in the hope that someone will eventually recognize their value. You offer them to what has earned them, and you withhold them without performance from what hasn't. Here is what this realization is actually asking you to absorb. The person an avoidant cannot stop thinking about is not a mystery type, not someone with rare and exotic qualities, not someone who mastered a technique or followed a script. It is someone who decided, genuinely from the inside out, that their own life was worth being fully present in, that their own development was worth real investment, that their own sense of self was not available for reorganization around someone else's discomfort with closeness. That decision is available to you. It is not a performance you produce for their attention. You don't become sovereign to make an avoidant obsess over you. You become sovereign because your life deserves someone who is fully present in it. You don't manufacture depth to attract the right person. You build it, slowly, through real choices, and let it filter for exactly who can meet it. You don't curate your unavailability. You create a life so genuinely full that your availability is naturally selective, naturally precious, naturally worth something real. The avoidant who cannot stop thinking about one type of person is not thinking about someone who played the game better. They are thinking about someone who stopped playing entirely. Self-worth is not what you perform under conditions of scarcity. It is what you carry into every room before the avoidant has had the chance to test its depth. Emotional intelligence is not the ability to read the avoidant's psychology and respond accordingly. It is the ability to read your own, to know what you need, what you offer, and what you are no longer willing to bend to accommodate. Personal power is not the ability to stay in someone's mind. It is the ability to be so fully yourself that you couldn't leave their mind even if you tried, not because you engineered it, because some people, once genuinely encountered, cannot be unfelt. Be that person, not for them. For every version of yourself that comes after this,